A couple things to consider for after you've done an interview. First things first, look at the resulting coverage from that interview. I'm actually surprised that a lot of scientists don't look at their own media coverage. They just kind of do the interview and then they hope it goes well, and if it's inaccurate or bad, they assume that they'll hear about it from somebody else. It's always a good idea to look at your own media coverage. If you have a press office, they might do that for you. If you're a superstar scientist who's doing hundreds of interviews a year, maybe you don't have time to look at your own media coverage. But for most scientists, the media work that they do is pretty infrequent. They can take the time to look at the journalism that's coming out of the publicly facing interviews that they're doing. And it's good to just be able to evaluate them, right? And most of the time, it's going to be good. Sometimes it's going to be bad. So you want to get to the second point here. What do you do when you notice something that's wrong in a story that a journalist has done? If you're a scientist, if you're somebody who is doing science communication at a research institution, first thing, the kind of piddling everyday stuff. So somebody's title is wrong, their name got spelled wrong, that sort of thing. That's simple. Just email the journalist; they'll get around to correcting it. If you think something is in error or is inaccurate and rises to the level of like really being inaccurate. I'm not talking about just a number that they got wrong. I'm not talking about stuff like that. But you think they actually misrepresented your research or some important point of your science, drop the journalist a note. And if it's a really minor thing that they can kind of correct next time around, that's one thing. But if it's something that you really want to correct, you need to be clear about the fact that you think it warrants a correction. It really depends on how bad you think it is, and I always recommend that scientists go talk to a press officer, a public information officer, a colleague to get an outside opinion about whether or not something should really warrant a correction. And I say that because a lot of times things that scientists view as inaccurate or potentially misleading, they're imprecise. And journalists are often in the position of having to give up precision just because they're dealing with very compact ways of communicating things, whether it's a short video, whether it's a soundbite in a radio interview, whether it's a 400-word, 600-word, 800-word article. They're not able to convey the level of precision that scientists would often like to see in public communications. So there's some gray area there. When something truly does require a correction, a lot of times scientists will come in with an attitude that they should be demanding a correction. And instead, what I'd like to see is I would like to see more scientists laying out the facts and then asking the journalist, do you think this warrants a correction? If I were writing something for my own institution, this would be the sort of thing that we would correct. These are my standards as a scientist. These are the standards we're using in science communication. What do you think? And that actually allows you to have a productive, healthy conversation about where some of the lines are. Now, sometimes you just want to flat out ask for a correction. Go for it. Almost every single time journalists are going to respond to a request for correction. They want to address it. They're as invested in accuracy as scientists are and as science communicators are. And it's really rare that you'll wind up with somebody where there's a legit correction and the journalist doesn't want to deal with it. You have a choice at that point. Do I want to make a stink about this? Do I want to potentially jeopardize my relationship with that journalist or their media outlet? And do I want to go over their heads to their editor? And boy, just, like anybody else, journalists hate when people go over their heads like that. And it happens to them a lot, especially journalists who write on politically contentious issues. They have people fighting over their journalism and their work all the time. It's part of the job. So when scientists do it, a lot of times they're viewing it in that context, especially if they're journalists who are writing in the policy political realm, as opposed to the way that a science beat journalist who doesn't write that much about policy or maybe doesn't write about policy at all might respond to the same sort of requests. So consider some of those different standards too. Now, a lot of scientists, they might wind up in a situation where they're looking at, a media outlet that isn't going to be fair to them, or a journalist who just isn't going to be fair to them. And in those cases, if you know the outlets, if it's a partisan blog, if it's a media outlet that just wants to make political points about your research, you're not going to get anywhere asking for a correction. In that case, you have to decide, is this important enough where I want to correct the record publicly? And a great way to do that is on a blog, an institutional blog that you control, on a publicly facing Facebook page, just so there's something there on the record so you can set that straight. And a scientist who actually faces a lot of misinformation about his research and stuff in his field, who does a really masterful job just quickly hammering that out and nipping that misinformation in the bud, is Dr. Michael Mann. And I would encourage you to look at his publicly facing Facebook page and some of the stuff that he's able to do to just set the record straight quickly and then get back to work, right? And get back to the proactive communication stuff that he does, and to get back to the scientific research that he does, right? Because that's the ultimate goal here, is to keep doing good science and getting more accurate information about the science out there. So I know I spent a lot of time talking about corrections and what can go wrong after an interview. And I want to close on the positive end, because the other thing is that there's a lot of great journalism out there that does get the science right, and that really illuminates issues related to the science. And there's a lot of, frankly, just awesome journalism out there. A lot of it's online now. A lot of it's with new scientific publications that have popped up that deal with the intersection of science and society. And I think scientists can do a much better job, promoting that journalism, promoting good journalism, praising journalists who've done a great job, and building relationships with journalists and with media outlets that are interested in good, effective science journalism, right? And there's such a tendency in the scientific community and in science communication for us to focus on the negative, because inaccuracies are so offensive to us. Let's spend a lot more time focusing on the positive and focusing on really good science journalism, and encouraging our audiences, encouraging other audiences that we connect with through science communication to check out that good science journalism, to share that, to point people to those journalists as important thought leaders in their field, and essentially encourage other media outlets to do really good science journalism too, right? Because I think when good science journalism succeeds, it creates a snowball effect, and other outlets want to do good science journalism too, and that's something that we all benefit from. So, be wary of the times that things go wrong and when you're going to have to do corrections, but don't let that distract you from praising good journalism when it's awesome.